A blizzard was heading towards the greater Boston area. But before the storm, Boston police officer John O'Keefe met his girlfriend, college professor Karen Reed, at a local bar in downtown Canton. At the end of the night, they were invited to an after party at another officer's home. Karen drove to that house, but she never got out of the car. John did. The next morning, John O'Keefe was found dead on the front lawn of that home. The question is, how did he die? Prosecutors say Karen Reed intentionally struck him with her car and murdered him. The defense says John went inside the home to the party and something happened. He was killed and placed onto the front yard by people inside. They also believe he was attacked by the homeowner's German Shepherd. At the first trial last year, the jury could not reach a unanimous verdict. So Karen Reed will be retried this spring on Court TV. As both sides prepare for that trial, the prosecution does not want the judge to allow the defense's dog bite expert who testified at the first trial to testify in the second trial. And today, a huge hearing as the judge listens once again to the testimony of this expert. Tonight, we'll bring in our trial insiders as we take a look at today's big hearing and the upcoming retrial of accused cop killer Karen Reed. I'm Vinnie Politan. Thank you so much for joining us tonight here on Closing Arguments. Great to have you aboard as we start a new year, and what a year ahead here on Court TV with the trials that are scheduled and set up to go. A lot of compelling cases, and one of them involves what I would call at this point a celebrity defendant, Karen Reed. She wasn't a celebrity before the case, but clearly through the coverage of this case and everything that has transpired, she has now risen to that level. As a matter of fact, I was there during the first trial, and when she would walk in and out of the courtroom, not since Johnny Depp have I seen that many people there to cheer on someone in the midst of a trial. It was unlike anything I've ever seen, because this is a murder trial. And she wasn't a celebrity before, but clearly this has turned her into a bit of a celebrity because of the notoriety of the case and the large pink army of people supporting her and part of this Free Karen Reed movement. So, it's real, and it's almost unreal to me, because, again, I've never seen anything like this in all my years at Court TV. And it has really changed the way this trial is being perceived by a lot of people. Now, there's going to be a retrial in 25. It's scheduled for the spring here on Court TV. And I've said this before, I may have said it last night, that it's rare that a retrial has any sort of buzz to it. Because, we saw that trial already, or, okay, I get what the evidence is. In this case, I think the buildup to the retrial, bigger, more intensity than the original trial, if that's possible. Now let's get back to the victim, John O'Keefe. He was killed. This was not natural causes. This was not an accident. Well, maybe it's an accident, right? But potentially a criminal accident is part of one of the charges the jury can potentially consider. But he didn't take his own life. Like, someone killed him. Like, when I say someone killed him, the actions of someone else resulted in the death of John O'Keefe. And that's important to remember. And that's something else that was very different about the first trial, is that both sides were talking about that. Yeah, there's a pink army supporting Karen Reed, but they were also proclaiming they were there for justice for John O'Keefe. But the two sides didn't agree to what justice was in this case, because they have different views of the evidence and different beliefs in what happened to John O'Keefe. So while both sides want justice for John O'Keefe, both sides want something completely different. So the question is, will the truth come out? Because that's the only way you get justice, is when the truth comes out. And the only ones at this point who can provide that is the jury. The jury listening to the evidence and 12 people who don't know each other, who don't know anyone involved in this case, coming together and figuring out, based on the testimony, based on the evidence, based on their life experiences, what happened here. And I think that's the biggest hope, is that this does not continue to be hung jury after hung jury after hung jury. You want the truth to come out. You want there to be a verdict. So both sides are getting ready. Big hearing today on Court TV, all about the injuries on John O'Keefe's arm. Where did they come from? Is that from the tail light? Is that from being struck by Karen Reed as she backed into him on purpose? Or is that from an animal, a German shepherd named Chloe, who lived inside the home where Karen Reed says John O'Keefe went inside to go to that after party? That's the question. Now, in the first trial, there was a dog bite expert who testified for the defense. Let me remind you of what she told that jury.
What is your opinion and conclusion concerning those injuries?
Those injuries appear to be consistent with an animal attack.
Can you be more specific in terms of the type of animal, or are you relegated to simply an animal attack?
Well, they are consistent with a large dog attack.
And on what do you base the opinion that the injuries are consistent with dog bite or scratch marks?
Well, the patterns. There are several patterns of parallel wounds that appear to be superficial scratches that could have been caused by nails or could have been caused by teeth. I'm very reasonable, very sure to, what's the word I want? Medical certainty. Very
All right,
high degree of medical certainty.
Reasonable degree of medical certainty.
Yes, definitely.
I think a high degree is higher than reasonable. Anyway, okay. So that was the expert that we saw and heard at trial. So the prosecution didn't have their own expert to talk about it. They had someone who said that, no, this is from the tail light. So we're going to bring in a dog bite expert. They were talking about it in court tonight. We're going to talk about it tonight. Joining us, an expert is a PhD in animal behavior, has studied it for 40 years. He's been retained in hundreds of court cases on this issue, Dr. Richard Polsky. Dr. Polsky, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Great to have you here.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Let me start with a general question, then I'll get more specific. Can you look at a photo of injuries and determine whether or not they're the result of a dog bite, dog scratch, dog attack?
Well, in my experience, you have to look at the totality of the evidence, which is more than just a photograph of the dog bite or the type of injury on the person's arm, like in this case, the victim's right arm. You have to ask certain questions about the behavior of the dog, as well as the context in which the incident happened. You look at the individual dog, you look at its temperament, and you ask, well, this dog with its behavioral history, would he bite a person in the context in which the incident supposedly happened? In order to do that, ideally, you should do, or if it's able, you do a behavioral inspection. There's a certain protocol for behavioral inspections to see if the dog had the temperament to inflict a bite injury. And in that regard, you also want to look at how well the dog knew the victim. Was this a stranger? Was this someone who
Complete
came to
stranger.
the house and regularly interacted?
Now, here, I'll give you the background of what the defense is alleging here, that there's some sort of altercation in the home, right, between perhaps the homeowner and the victim here, and they believe at some point the dog jumped in. That's kind of what they're intimating in their theory of the case. The dog does have a history of one other bite, and that bite involved, I think there were two dogs going at it, and someone was trying to break it up between the two dogs, and the dog bit the other dog owner. I believe that's the backstory on that. So I'll give you a little more background there. Does that give you a little more to think about? And what do you think about that photograph?
Well, you certainly have to consider the nature of the wounds, whether they appear to be caused by a dog or some other animal. Injuries like this can cause can be caused by similar type of inflictions. For example, there's lacerations caused by a sharp object. There's human bites. There's cats can inflict bites like this. Rodents, coyotes, and the nails, for example. So the photographs in themselves cannot be used to come to any definitive conclusion. As I said, from my perspective, you have to look at the totality of the evidence. And the totality of the evidence, you have to look at the context. You have to look at the motivation of the dog. You have to look at the temperament of a dog. Would the dog be motivated to attack a person in this context in which it allegedly occurred? So there's certain animal behavior questions. And in that regard, part of the method, if it's possible, is to do a temperament test of the dog.
Gotcha.
And that can be done.
Let me do.
Yeah,
I don't want to run out of time here, Doctor.
So
I want to play something else for you that came up in court today, and I think a lot of folks have questions about it. Let's take a listen to the dog bite expert. She's a doctor, Dr. Marie Russell.
Did you ever discuss going to see Chloe and doing these studies on Chloe so you could see if they were dissimilar to these abrasions?
I was asked to evaluate the wounds.
Do you know that Chloe exists, that we provided notice to you, that we went up and saw Chloe and took molds? Did you know that?
Objection, Your Honor.
Did you know that? Going to allow it. Did you know that, Doctor?
I do know that now.
Now that you know that Chloe's available, wouldn't those molds be helpful? Wouldn't you want to look at them and compare them to the distances on the abrasions on Mr. O'Keefe's arm?
Objection, Your Honor.
I'm going to allow it.
I don't think it's necessary for many reasons.
Okay, doctor, what are your thoughts about taking a look at the dog molds? Is that something that would be done normally?
Certainly, yes. If it's possible, the dog's still alive, you certainly, absolutely want to take teeth impressions and to determine if the teeth are consistent with the wounds on the victim. For this expert says it's not necessary. It leaves me confused. You have to look at as much evidence as possible to come to any definitive conclusions. And after you look at including DNA evidence, sometimes in these cases, clothing are stripped and there's bites from head to toe. And based on the totality of all the evidence I briefly mentioned, you can come to certain conclusions with a reasonable degree of certainty. Yes, it was a dog bite. Some of the wounds were a dog bite, other wounds were not, or none of the injuries were caused by a dog bite, or one can't draw conclusions based on the evidence. But it's very important, in my opinion, to look more of the evidence whenever it's possible than just looking at the wounds from a photograph.
Okay.
It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense to me.
Let me play you one more
that's
thing.
my opinion.
Yep. No,
Okay.
it's very clear. I mean, very, very clear what you're saying with your background. Let's take a listen to the doctor one more time here, talking about her experience, and because they're using her as an expert, and that's the issue in court.
Not very many medical examiners have the experience first of all, have experience with dog bites, seeing hundreds and thousands of dog bites and treating them. And not very many medical examiners have even autopsied a case of dog bites. So although, some physicians have certain opinions based on what they know, they don't have my experience. I'm
Do
sorry.
you know if Mr. Walsh had your experience or not?
I don't know, who
The
is it?
gentleman who gave this opinion that was employed by the federal government, do you know if he had your experience or not?
What's his name?
Mr. Walsh, John Walsh.
No, I don't.
So he could have more experience for all you know.
Oh, highly unlikely.
Okay, you have more experience than anybody in the country.
I think I have at least as much experience as any other possible person in the country. And I have it from both aspects, from the clinical aspect and from the forensic aspect.
Okay, Dr. Polsky, her background, 30 years. She says, I believe it's about 500 dog bite cases that she's treated and observed. For her versus a medical examiner, whose opinion do you think would be better? And number two, How many experts are there like you out there who do this type of work, and what are their backgrounds?
Well, there's various kinds of so-called dog bite experts. I don't believe I've ever come across an emergency room physician who qualified as an expert. There's dog trainers, there's veterinarians, there's animal behaviorists, for example, veterinary behaviorists. And the problem with a person like this expert, in my opinion, is she's trained to fix the injury, suture the injury. Sure, she may have seen the characteristics of many of these alleged dog bite incidents, dog bite injuries, but as I said, they can be caused by other means. And I don't know if she went into that depth of investigation. And a dog bite injury is caused by the behavior of the dog. So you have to do an animal behavior analysis. And as I said, you have to look at the context, the motivation of the dog, the relationship. And I don't understand. I'm not clear if she did any of this. And if she didn't do any of this, then it doesn't meet the standard needed to come to definitive or reasonable conclusions.
Dr. Polsky.
Yes.
We're out of time for tonight, but this case is continuing, and we will continue whenever we have this issue. We want to call you because very enlightening. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you too.
All right, let's bring in our trial insiders. Joining me tonight, Karen Reed, supporter and creator of Justice for Officer John O'Keefe and Karen Reed Facebook page, Nick Rocco. Also with us, Massachusetts criminal defense attorney Joseph Krowski Jr. and the YouTuber behind Yellow Cottage Tales, Kevin Lenahan. Great to have everyone here. All right, let me start with you, Nick. What are your thoughts here about what's happening in court now and about this evidence of this dog attack?
Well, I think one of the most important things about the impressions of the teeth from Chloe is that this incident happened almost 3 years ago this month. So 3 years is a long time. Things can happen. Teeth can move. Teeth can fall out. So getting the impressions, is it important? Yes. But is it going to be, as far as being used in court, there's no direct bite on John's arm that's going to have a full teeth imprint on there. That when John was being attacked by the dog, I'm sure John was moving, just like Marie Russell said. He wasn't just laying there when Chloe was attacking. He was probably moving, so the dog didn't get a firm bite on his arm. And I think today, Hank Brennan was trying to prove that she wasn't an expert and that she provided basically no methodology to her claims. But in the Demunic and Pollock the articles there, the whole reason for those articles was to point out the fact that pattern recognition is acceptable to rule in dog bites. And then you also have the case of Robert Alessi, where I believe it was in New York, a Dauber hearing as well, where if a doctor sees and treats dog wounds and injuries, they're reliable to be an expert inside of a courtroom. So, this is the defense expert. If they have Chloe, if Hank Brennan is very strong in this case, there should be no reason to exclude her because they should have an expert that's going to be able to debunk everything, that she says.
Yeah.
And one thing that I did.
Go ahead.
The other thing I was going to bring up was, today was mentioned, we heard more federal investigation, that this doctor is an Emmy and came to the conclusion that this was not consistent with an animal bite. But I'm sure what Plevin is going to do is tell you that, hey, you got to believe the feds now, but don't believe everything else they said. So it's going to be a double-edged sword no matter which way this case goes. And we know we've seen it from the first trial.
Yeah. How about just having a battle of the experts, Joseph?
Well, a battle of the experts is fine if you have two experts. Dr. Russell is not an expert in diagnosing the cause of an injury. Just because and I'm not discounting the fact that she is an experienced ER doctor and was a forensic medical examiner at one point, but she has never in the lifespan of her career taken an injury whose cause was unknown and followed an accepted, recognized methodology and come up with an opinion on the cause of that injury. Her experience is all empirical. People have come into the ER, they've reported that they've been bit by a dog, and she's given whatever necessary triage or treatment. And you saw today when she was pressed, she just kept coming up with the conclusory term, pattern recognition. What is your methodology? Do you take a picture? Do you then take a known exemplar? Do you then look for measurements? Do you then get it peer reviewed? She couldn't answer a simple question, and it's no disrespect to her. It's because she has no experience in forensic dog bite pathology at all. So what Attorney Brennan is saying is that just because you have some sort of professional expertise, you just can't get up there and opine whatever comes off the top of your head. And there was a lot of critical points, but I don't want to take up the whole show, but I hope we have time to get into them.
Well, we never have enough time to get into everything. In this case, there's so much. I want to show everyone this, Kevin, and I want to get your reaction. This is when it comes out in court that the feds came to their conclusion about the cuts based upon what their medical examiner they consulted with had to say.
Did you know that the U.S. Attorney's Office employed a deputy medical examiner to look at these bites? And then he had commented that the wounds at 2 to 3 millimeters up to 7 centimeters were documented on Mr. O'Keefe's right arm, and the injuries do not photographically appear to be nor are described as puncture bite wounds, and thus are highly unlikely to be the result of an animal bite attack. Did you get that expert opinion from the United States Attorney's Office when they investigated this case to consider as part of peer review?
Objection, Your Honor.
Okay, here's what I'm trying to figure out, Kevin. The injuries came from something, right? So who's going to tell us where these injuries came from? Who's going to tell us? Like at the first trial, we heard dog bite, and then we heard this guy from the state police who was not the greatest expert. He was a bad expert, let's just admit it, right? So why in the second trial is everything going to be different? Why are we changing the rules here?
Yeah, listen, I agree 100% that the first trial was a huge mistake. And I said this all along, to not really explain exactly specifically how these injuries were caused. That was a mistake by the state. And we're seeing that's not going to happen this time. No detail is left, no stone is being left unturned here. So, and he started giving a sense of it, that the arm was bent, he said, in a defensive position. And we see the federal expert described that some of the wounds seem to have been a continuation from one side, the forearm, to the upper arm, which would happen if your arm is kind of bent and something hits it like that. So we're starting to get an emerging detailed picture that we'll see, obviously get a much better sense of at the trial. And also, if I could mention this, there's so much that we learn on these cases, and, big part of it is learning how much that we don't know about how things go. But Dr. Scorti-Beller, the medical examiner in the trial, testified that she found hemorrhaging on the pancreas and the stomach, and that was a sign of hypothermia. But what she made clear was there are other things that could cause that hypothermia or that hemorrhaging. And the reason to produce her conclusion, she has to get testimony from the troopers that said, yes, this victim was found outside. He was outside for a long time. He was cold. His body temperature was low. What we don't see here with Dr. Russell is what she did was she read an article in the paper, decided it was dog bites, reached out to the defense team through the Los Angeles Attorney's Office.
Yeah.
And since she's been just arguing to that conclusion and just trying to force everything into that.
We've got the music playing, Kevin. That means we got to go to a break. We'll be right back.
She grabbed my hands and she said, Google hypothermia, Google how long it takes to die in the cold. And so I had my phone out and it was cold and my hands were frozen and I have MS, and I took my phone out while she was screaming and shaking my arm, and I attempted to Google how long does it take to die in the cold.
That's Jennifer McCabe describing from her perspective when she made that Google, how long to die in the cold, that became the foundation of the Free Karen Read movement. Karen Read and her supporters and her attorneys and their expert believe that search was actually done around 2:30 in the morning, just before 2:30 a.m., not at 6:30 a.m., when Jen McCabe and the prosecution says that search was made. Well, now, in the first trial, we had, experts testifying about what that meant, right, for both sides. Now, you've got the prosecution trying to exclude the defense expert in the second trial to testify about when that Google search was done. Take a look. This is from the state motion. Mr. Whiffen, who is the prosecution expert, provides, I can state with absolute certainty that there is no evidence whatsoever on this device that the Google searches how long tie die in kick did or hose long to die in cold occurred prior to 6:23 a.m. on the 29th of January 2022, and there's no evidence that the user tried to delete any search history or that tampering occurred with any of the data I examined. Okay, and they using that as the basis that you've got to exclude the defense expert. Huh? Still with me tonight, Karen Reed supporter Nick Rocco, attorney Joseph Krowski Jr., and YouTuber Kevin Lenahan. Joseph, I always get skeptical of people who say this is not even debatable. Like, are we now going to, before the trial, decide whose expert is better, and that's the only one who gets to testify?
I think it's a lot more simplistic than that. I don't think that Green is going to testify. If you have read that motion, there's a footnote, there's an attached 40-page report from Whiffen summarizing the basis of his conclusions. My guess is that Green is going to read that report and is going to recognize the error in his ways. As you remember, he was almost apologetic at the first trial. So look, I understand and appreciate the battle of the experts, but when an expert such as Whiffen, who actually works for Cellbrite, which is the company that created the software that does the extraction and the analysis, that has reviewed it, and he has the support of Cellbrite, the company, saying that search did not happen unequivocally. I don't think there's going to be much fight from the defense. I'm curious to see if Green's going to stake his reputation, because he has to live to see another day after this trial and try to refute what the company itself has said. And contextually, from a common sense perspective, it never made sense that Jen McCabe was lying in bed, Google searching her daughter's basketball league, and at the same time thought that she better check how long O'Keefe can live out there on the frozen tundra of the front yard of 34 Fairview.
All right, so what you're saying is you believe, based upon this information, that the expert for the defense may not want to testify. I'm going to go to Kevin, and then I want to get to Nick afterwards. But Kevin, your thoughts on this subject?
Well, 227 is the thing that got a lot of us going. Initially, I believed there might have been a conspiracy here. When I looked at this, naively, I thought data was just data. But we now know that the best experts in the world, including the company that produced this software that found that 227, they say that absolutely there was no search made at 227. We know logically there were 3 searches made. The defense doesn't dispute that 2 searches were made at 623. All 3 had slightly different spelling. So logically, it was someone just trying to struggle to come up with that at the same time. It was unlikely they'd be doing that same search twice. We know that on the ambulance that Karen was taken on a little bit later, when she was section 12, she asked the paramedic something similar. How long would it take for someone to die in the cold? So there's just logic defeats this. And even just the idea of it is almost offensively silly, that these people got in the car to go home from 34 Fairview, dropping off 2 other guests. And if the idea is that John was mauled by a dog and beat up inside the house, and the plan was to put him out alive on their own lawn, and the McCabes are going to go home just casually dropping people off, tuck their 4 daughters into bed, and just casually make this search. Jen's heart rate is perfectly normal. They would have, even if they were psychopaths, just in their own self-interest so that they wouldn't go to jail for the rest of their lives, one of those people in the car would have said, we have to go to the police, because you're not going to be able to hide this kind of attack from a medical examiner or from the ER staff.
All right, Nick, I'll give you the final word on this. And one thing I want you to address also is, do you believe Richard Green will testify? And if he doesn't, will that change your mind about anything?
I believe Richard Green is going to testify again if Judge Bev allows him to. Rich Green did not just only use Cellbrite. He used 5 different softwares to find this Google search. Not only did he find it, but the FBI found it as well. So if we're to believe that the FBI is saying those aren't dog bites, then we're to believe that that Google search happened. I mean, you can't say one person from the FBI is wrong and the other one's right. I mean, it's going to collide regardless of which way you look at it. And the Quantico expert and Richard Green, they had the full extraction report when they did these extractions. Ann Whiffen and Jennifer Hyde, they did not, not Jennifer Hyde, Jessica Hyde, they did not have the full extraction. They had a very narrow scope of what they were actually looking at. So if we're going to sit here and say this Celebrite data, the 227, it's wrong, it's wrong, it's wrong, even though it shows it, how many other innocent people have gone to jail based off a search from Celebrite? And if this was Karen Reed that searched Hoss Long to Die in Cold, they would be the state would be looking for experts to prove that that Google search happened in fact. So now I think what we're going to see is you got a little bit of information for the feds on one side, you got a little bit of information from the feds for the other side. Now it's like, okay, well, who do we believe? It's going to be debatable to the end and probably until the end of this trial.
Yep.
So,
I told you,
beyond,
folks, the retrial, bigger than the original. Unbelievable. Like Godfather 2.